There are many hyperbolic statements that exist in the Megaten fandom, things people say just because other people say them. Some notable examples are Nocturne has no story, Shin Megami Tensei is hard, and Megaten is a niche franchise. Another one, the topic for today's video is, Trinity Soul is bad. I've heard tons of reasons as to why this is. Some will tell you, it's because it's not canon, and things that aren't canon kinda suck, I guess. Another reason, the one that I hear the most often, is it's boring. I can understand why people get bored with it, but let me explain instead why I like it. Persona Trinity Soul debuted January 5th, 2008, and 2 years later would be brought to the West with English subs by NIS America in what was a new venture for NIS America as they began to branch into anime, and Trinity Souls was among the first things to be localized by them. The studio behind the anime was A1 Pictures. While the studio is currently known for its penchant for quantity over quality, Persona Trinity Soul was oddly developed during the transition into that sort of mindset, being published in January of 2008, A1's fourth ever anime. The anime was directed by Atsushi Matsumoto. Matsumoto had experience in a great number of anime, OVA, and animated features, from storyboarding for Revolutionary Girl Utena to storyboarding for Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. The art was done by 3 people: Shigenori Sojima, the lead artist for Persona 3, 4, and 5, who designed the main characters, Yuriko Ishii, who worked on all the other cast, and also functioned as the animation director. By the way, it's worth noting that her career has been full of amazing projects. The one I found most interesting is that she also worked on the second Devil Children anime. And Nobuhiko Genma, who designed the Persona. He's known for his work on Mobile Suit Gundam UC, but the things I know him for the most are Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040 and Scryed. Taku Iwasaki did the music for the series, and they too have a solid body of work, including music from Rurouni Kenshin, Bungo Stray Dogs, and JoJo Part 2. Suffice to say, there's a lot of talent here. So what's this anime about? Persona Trinity Soul is about 3 brothers: Ryo Kanzato, the older brother, a stoic and serious man with a heavy weight on his shoulders; Jun Kanzato, the youngest brother, who had a twin sister at some point. He's the mediator and he's pretty mature for his age. He's also got a heavy weight on his shoulders. And finally, Shin. He's a bit of an artist and he's kinda quiet, and he's got a heavy weight on his shoulders. Set 10 years after the events of Persona 3 in a different city, Ayanagi. Like many other fictional cities in Persona, the name has significance. The Nagi part of the name can be taken to mean the calm before the storm, which is in line with the pacing, the theming, and I would say that that sort of phrase encapsulates the series. The story revolves around various mysteries. What is a persona? What's shadow extraction? Why are kids dying with their bodies literally turned inside out? What happened to the Kanzato parents, and why can't Shin remember it? And why did the apathy syndrome return? What sets this apart from Persona 4 and 5, and even Persona 3 to some extent, is how dark it can be. This series is kind of a love letter to Persona 1, 2, and 3. There's many parallels and references to everything that came before it, with the older brother being a serious cop, the loss of a twin, the repressing of horrible memories. This in a lot of ways embodies what I like most about Megaten media, and it genuinely surprised me how grim the show gets. For instance, in the second episode, there's an attempted rape, and the way it happens is so realistic, it actually made me feel uneasy. The catalyst for the story is Shin and Jun move back to live with their brother in their old house. They establish pretty much in the first 10 minutes of that first episode that Ryo is pretty disconnected from his brothers, seemingly having forgotten to pick them up at the airport, forcing them to walk home. This is where Igor interacts with Shin, and that's the inciting incident that gets the ball rolling. Shin and Jun enroll into a nearby school, and they make friends. They also learn about the bizarre shadow extraction that is all the craze. It is supposed to somehow relax students, and it's pretty popular. He learns that he also has a strange power, the power of Persona, and that there's some strange things going on, and the story builds up from there. The initial episodes give off the impression that Ryo is a jerk. He's a chief of police, and he's investigating the underpinned mysteries that are introduced in the opening of the series. There's a lot of tension between him and Shin, with Shin really wanting them to return to that loving family sort of dynamic they used to have. A lot of this sort of careful planning really lends itself to the series, something that you would find and you would only notice if you were paying attention because of how subtle it can be. What I like about this whole series in general is how it's paced. It's a little slow, and we get scraps of information as the layers are peeled back. It builds and we get a lot of interesting imagery and concepts baked in and repeating. A motif that we see quite often is a feather, reminding the brothers of the story that their parents wrote, which is also their last story, called the whale's feather. The other bizarre thing has to do with Jun, who seems to have a little bit of a split personality in a way. It's explained later on in the series, but his twin sister has passed away. The idea for this sort of thing is usually kind of absurd, but it works here. It's absurd here too, but it still works. And the twin life thing just reminds me of the Persona 1 manga, which was adapted with full creative freedom, by the way, and it gave us a totally new backstory to the protagonist. The protagonist had a twin who died when he was younger, and he adapted some of the twin's personality. He'd also wear the earring to differentiate himself from his brother. Another thing I like is how the concept of social links are presented in this. There's a little bit of a lack of timeline to what's happening. What I mean is you can't really fully understand when things are taking place because the entire series takes place in winter, and oftentimes things don't continue in a way that you would think it would chronologically. There's these character vignettes that are really nice. Takido, one of the side characters, opens up to Shin in an episode where he's talking about his missing friend. I like how it tells you implicitly what kind of person Takido is without being overt or unrealistic. He's coy with his words and he's very delicate with how he expresses himself. It's nice that they don't hold the audience's hand in that sense. You can tell that Takido cares very inwardly, but expresses it very minimally. And also it's kind of interesting that he looks like Ryuji with Megakin's hair. And it's doubly interesting that his rival has Chie's sweater. Like I said before, the anime runs at a glacial pace. For me, it's perfect because it really builds tension and lets the many mysteries unravel in a way that I find pretty satisfying. Another interesting thing is how they address the mysterious shadow extraction, which are something that people in the series equate to drug abuse. Doing it too much will get you addicted, and you'll have to do a whole detox. Doing it too much could also put you in a comatose state. And in the episode where they address this a lot, I find it to be the worst offender of tonal absurdity. In this series, there's not a whole lot of humor, yet in this very serious drug abuse parallel, we get some bizarre jokes that, because of the tone of the show, does not land, and I find that many of the jokes that they make in the show don't particularly land. Anyway, because I want you to experience the story yourself, I'm gonna leave it there, but I do want to talk about the different aspects of the show. First, the music. The music is great. One of the best songs is Der Mann seit mir mein eigen Gestalt, which confused me a bit because it sounded a little like another song that I've heard by Schubert. And it turns out it's actually a reimagining of said song by Schubert called Der Doppelganger. And to the uninitiated, this may seem bizarre because why would you build a song off of an already existing classical song? Well, I think that's another baked-in Persona concept. The original Velvet Room music featured in Persona 1 and 2 had many classical tracks featured, including Gymnopédie No. 1 by Eric Satie. It's fascinating to find something like that in this anime. The original music is great too, especially the eponymous track, Trinity Soul. Taku Arasaki really knew what they were doing, providing the emotional grounding for the series. Not just that, but the opening tracks are catchy and great, especially Breaking Through by Shuhei Kita. I was almost sad when it changed to The Word of Voice by Flow halfway through the series. And if Flow sounds familiar to you, that's because they're the ones that did that epic Naruto song, Go. The two ending themes are great too, but to me, Suicide's love story just hit harder than Found Me, though both are great. This is no surprise. The sound production staff all had a lot of positive things to say about development, showing about how freeing it was to have so much creative freedom. And not just for the people making the music, but also for the voice actors. The voice actors said they tried to follow a general rule of sounding as natural as possible and not sounding anime-ish. And it really shows. Most of the show's voice work reminds me of Mushishi, where it's subdued and more mature, more akin to how normal people talk. Everyone involved in regards to the sound actually wanted a sequel, 2 more seasons, or even a spin-off, and I can see why. The art of the show is also solid. I find that although Soejima designed only the Kanzato boys and Megumi, those characters fit stylistically very well with the rest of the cast. Though at times, I think that in animation, proportions can feel a little weird, especially with the eyes. The way the Persona look here, though, I don't particularly care for. They're somewhat transparent, and while the designs aren't awful, they are lacking a touch of Kaneko's Persona designs that, without that je ne sais quoi, these feel like derivatives of Soejima's Persona design model. Although Genma specifically says that he only looked at the designs of the previous Persona, but didn't try to let them influence his designs too much. This might just be me, but I like to see Persona names and designs go hand in hand with their origins. In this anime, even though I knew the names of the Persona, I could not tell you who they were supposed to be. Another thing that stands out to me for this series is the tones. I described it a little earlier with the example of the snow, but the color and the tones are very nice. The show overall has a very muted and drab look to it because it's in winter, and I think that was an intentional decision to tie symbolically and emotionally to the story. The way they create the mood with the color and tones is very nice, and I know that this very intentional palette could be off-putting for some people, but for me it just works. Since not everyone here is fluent in Japanese, I might have to talk about the subs. At times, the subs can be pretty awkward and stiff. Not much to say really, but it's fine for what it is. There were some funny little exchanges though. Now let's talk about the animation. I think that in general, overall, it feels good, but compared to the music, the story, the art, and the backgrounds, I think that this is the weakest part of the series. The fight scenes in particular seem to be storyboarded and animated pretty awkwardly, with the hits lacking any real feeling of weight to them. Most of the time I was sold on the show, but whenever they would move into these fight sequences, I just felt like it was pretty low quality in terms of animation. But the compositions of the framing, the way that things are shown, it's all pretty great, and it reminds me of a traditional cinematic experience. Yutaka Omatsu, the animation producer, often considered how to tell the story realistically. He said he really wanted to show the distance between the brothers as visually as possible, and he used his experience as the younger brother in his family as a model for this. Omatsu's focus on the realistic displays of emotion and dynamics in relationships, it's part of the greatest strengths of the show. They had a team that knew what they were doing, but I really wish Persona designs were more thought out and the fight sequences had a bit of a different direction artistically, and also, like I said, had more weight to them. Well, if it's slow and the animation isn't that great at times, why would I recommend it? You're asking yourself. Well, I'd recommend it because it's how I feel this series is narratively strong. The show has a stillness and a nature focus that reminds me of Iyashike, a healing anime. Though the rest of the elements focus mostly on the healing of the three Kanzatos, the show often has a dreamy-like feeling to it too. What I mean by that is that the episodes will sometimes have a major bit of action or story, and the following episode does not pick up exactly where that left off. Instead, it just continues and cuts exactly where it was. The episodes themselves generally closes out whatever plot point they open up with, but always seem to add a little bit more to the story in a way I appreciate, because I don't like being spoon-fed information. The seemingly non-linear structure works well in the building of the atmosphere here. Some of the best moments introduced in the later Persona titles are the parts where the groups experience the school trips and little vacations, where you get to see the characters fleshed out more because they're not in the normal game environment. More often than not, the games tend to play these for laughs, but the way Trinity Soul approaches it is with deliberate meaning, though they do that exact one trope that you're expecting from a hot spring scene. You get a lot of sense of who people are without them being shown in caricatures, more often than not. One example is in episode 7, where Shin tells Jun that the vending machines Jun talked about were considerably more far than he had said, to which Jun retorts, "Wasn't it better than thinking that it was very far?" And Shin kind of pauses and then he just agrees. In that simple exchange, we get a sense of their relationship, though by episode 7 I think that we got the dynamic down, as well as more insight into the way they perceive things. The way the characters slowly build up their powers with their persona and not just have mastery over it or a good understanding of it is actually refreshing. I like the way that it's built up instead of just they have their powers and they figure it out right away. Because for most of the series, they're not really motivated to ever use their persona. I'm also not going to pretend that I didn't know about the Trinity Soul hate. I've scrolled through many reviews about the series, and I think there's a bunch of different problems at play here, one of which being more about taste than anything else. And the visceral opinions are very interesting because they just run so counter to my opinion on the series. A simple example is how people will call it boring and confusing. The show generally juggles a grand total of 2 main plot elements, and it takes about 24 episodes to get through and explain what's going on exactly. The story is not really ever info dumped, with the focus being on fleshing out the core cast and providing vignettes so you can understand who the cast is and let them grow over time. And like I said, the concept of time in the series is a little convoluted, but I find it all very simple to understand and really straightforward. The characters are not simplistic pastiche of what people are actually like. They are nuanced. They don't generally announce their thoughts or feelings in that unusual way that shonen anime tends to do. And they also don't use a wide range of exaggerated facial expressions. A lot of times, you won't even see characters smile, and that's because the show is not very happy in general. And that sort of heavy mood, it permeates the entire series. If you don't like that, then you probably won't like this show. I think it's worth noting how many people cite this as not being canon, or not being very Persona-like. While the staff behind it consulted Atlus in every single episode, and they were diehard fans. Kazuki Adachi describes how he got into this franchise with Persona 1 and he loved it. And he was very excited at the prospect of creating his own show after working on Persona 3 with Atlus. He said he strived to create feelings that you got from playing the games. And I think that he did that. Many of the scenes that stood out felt like the same sort of memorable scenes that we got from Persona 1, 2, and 3. As for not being canon, I just don't think that that matters. Many Persona games aren't canon. A lot of the spin-offs aren't canon, and many of the other media, like drama CDs and manga, are not canon. Maybe they're all not canon. But why would you reduce the quality of work just based on if it's canon or not? At the time that the series was being made, it was canon. It wasn't until Persona 4 was released that we started getting confirmation that this was an alternate timeline. So what I'm trying to say is that if you want to enjoy any media in general, just experience it for what it is. Fixating on whether or not it's canon, or that somehow it not being canon is a negative, is not logical to me. Going into this and expecting something like Persona 4 or 5's pacing or overly energetic cast with exaggeratedly unique people will let you down, because this cast is more akin to real life people, and I can see how people wanting to escape from real life into the fantastic world of Persona might not find this palatable. But if you like that sort of realism, that sort of people-centric drama with a focus on how the characters are damaged and require healing, the slow understanding of what it takes to grow up and sacrifice, or to understand a perspective that you don't normally see, that's what this show is really all about. This show doesn't hold your hand. It just wants you to experience what it is for what it is. And if you don't like it, that's fine. There's not really a right or wrong in this sort of thing. Media can be good to some people and bad to others, but just don't feel compelled to tell other people not to experience this media just because you don't like it. Your opinion's not fact. But hey, neither is mine. But I was able to talk about this at all because of today's sponsor, Bai. With Bai, you can import many great products from Japan. I mean, looking at my room, many of the things that I have here, I imported using their service. Their service works with many major retailers, and there's a browser extension that I actually really like that they have that you can simply download as well. That browser extension makes it pretty easy to just kind of look through different websites and just add things to the cart willy-nilly. Using Bai is pretty simple. You log in and you access many major retailers, you know, whatever one you want. The ones I typically use are Mercari and Yahoo Auctions Japan. You can search up whatever you want and you can either bid on them or buy them. And because Bai likes us so much, they're offering my viewers 2,000 yen, or roughly $20, for anyone who uses my link to create a new account and use their service. Again, I can't recommend their services enough, so please consider buying some stuff.